the Geneva Bible translators, the King James Bible translators, and even the Reina, I don't even know, the Spanish Bible, took this now that's original. And we get it in English, but the original language that was written in Hebrew or Aramaic. That's what it says, an anointed one, a prince. Well, the Geneva Bible translators, Reina Valera, that's what it's called. Reina Valera translators, the King James translators, they knew that Messiah, the prince who was crucified, as we read in verse 26, was Jesus. So since they knew that this was Jesus in verse 26, guess what they did? They took an anointed one, a prince, since they knew it was Jesus, and they said, Messiah, the prince. Capitals. Original language, no capitals. Original language, kind of vague. An anointed one, a prince, we don't know who it is. King James, Geneva, Reina Valera, and now the Ryrie Study Bible, the NAS, that's what I'm reading from the New American Standard, and the NIV, they all do this now. Messiah, the Prince. And not only do they do that for verse 26, but they've acted up and said verse 25 and verse 26 are all referring to Jesus, who is the Messiah, the Prince. Okay? What did that do? What did that do? And what's wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with that? Well, unfortunately, there is. Gabriel was misquoted when they did this. Gabriel said an anointed one. He said a prince. An anointed one, a prince. He did not say Jesus. He did not say the Messiah, the prince. He didn't say that. They misquoted Gabriel. So what did that make people do? Well, remember this. 70 weeks are determined upon what? Thy people and thy city. Your people and the holy city. That's what they're determined on. You've got to remember that. That's what Gabriel said. Know and therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command or word to rebuild Jerusalem unto an anointed one, a prince, will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now, you've got to understand why they made this mistake. They should never have done this. They should never have done this. Why did they make this mistake? Take this out. It's not the same. They made that mistake because they lived at the time that they did. They did not know that in about 400 years, Israel and Jerusalem would be together again. So, after the 62 weeks, an anointed one is what it says. We know who this is. Will be cut off. And the prince of the people of the prince that shall come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And sanctuary. Okay? After the 62 weeks. Now, note that that's what all that Gabriel says. He says there's going to be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one will be cut off, but not for himself. After the 62 weeks, the people of the prince that shall come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. He doesn't mention anything about the 7 weeks. He only mentioned that one time. He says, know and therefore understand, from the going forth of the command to rebuild Jerusalem shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. But since those Geneva Bible translators, Reina Valera Bible translators, and the King James translators way back in 1611 who did not know that in 400 years Israel would be a nation again and that they would gain Jerusalem again, right? They did not know that. So what they did was they said Messiah the Prince, put the capital letters there, and every scholar and all the people behind them tried to, they joined the two timelines together, what they did, the 62 weeks and the 7 weeks. And that comes out to be about 483 years? I could be wrong. But it messed it up. Because once you put those two timelines together, it takes you past Jesus' earthly ministry. And so then they had to come up with new calculations. They say, oh, well, they were talking about 360-day prophetic years instead of a 365-day year. But even if you do that, you have to understand that the Jews, yes, they had 360-day years, but they had an extra leap month once in a while to make up for the loss because they weren't going by a solar calendar, they were going by the lunar calendar. So it leads to all kinds of mess. And so now what you have are the main interpretation that they use now, are the one that the big guns use, the David Jeremiahs, the John MacArthurs out there, the Robert Jeffersons, those guys. They're going to say, they're going to use Sir Robert Anderson's 360-day year and say it takes you all the way to Jesus' triumphal entry. Well, Seventh-day Adventists, they use something different, and they say, no, it goes like this, and they have their own interpretation. It says it takes them to the baptism of Jesus. But if you look at the numbers, use the solar calendar, it takes you about 38 AD 38. And when you understand that Jesus was born about 4 to 7 BC, it's worse than that. So now you're like 10, 15 years beyond his crucifixion. Okay? Not until Messiah the Prince, until Messiah the Prince is dead. After he's dead, years after he's dead. Anyway, it doesn't work. However, when you take those 62 weeks of years, 434 years, back to the word of permission to restore and build Jerusalem by Artaxerxes I. And Nehemiah chapter 2 verse 1 says it was in the 20th year of his reign, which takes us to about 444 BC. You count forward these 62 weeks, it's going to take you to about 10 BC. We're still a little off. 10 BC is not, the birth of Christ is about 5 years before he was born. Okay? Now you got to do more research, right? How do they understand what AD, BC, and all that stuff is? And that takes you to Ptolemy's King's List, Ptolemy's Canons they call it. And a guy named Ptolemy who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, compared some calendars, the Egyptian calendars and the Babylonian calendars, and the solar eclipses, the lunar eclipses, the stars, and all this sort of thing to bring out this calendar. But the problem with Ptolemy's canon is that it does not begin at the actual beginnings of the kings in his king's list. He absorbs kings that reigned less than a year in that king's list. So now you have a little bit of wiggle room. You have some kings that have been included in these kings, which means if they had been included, that little less than a year part, that might move that king up a little bit further. If you have several of these guys, it's going to move you up about 5 years, right? And then you have another problem. It's the actual time that the king started to reign. They don't use that. They have a regnal date, which has to do with equinoxes and things like that. So there's another place for some wiggle room there. We can't precisely date, like so many people say that we can. We can't. We can't precisely date, 454, July 6th, 454 BC. We can't do that. We can say it, but we're not going to be precise because of the wiggle room that we have. They're depending on Ptolemy's canons, and there's some shaky ground there. So 10 BC isn't that far away, and it was 62 weeks that led us to the birth of Jesus Christ, 62 weeks of years, 434 years. And Jesus was born somewhere between 4 and 7 BC, so the wiggle room kind of meshes, not too bad. And he was born, he was declared Christ at birth, if you look at the Gospel of Luke. So you have Messiah the Prince. How do we know it's Messiah the Prince? Well, you go to Matthew. Who came there? You had these guys from where? The East. Where did Daniel live? The East. What did Daniel write? This prophecy. And was Daniel famous in that area? You know he was. He could interpret dreams. He could tell future events. You know those astrologers and magi, they were checking this guy out. They knew the time. They knew the 62 weeks. They saw the star. They came and said, let's worship the King of the Jews, Messiah the Prince. 62 weeks leads to that anointed one. Fast forward to now. Now, where are we? When are we? When are we? Okay, 62 weeks passed. But Gabriel also said something about 7 weeks. Now 7 weeks is 49 years. Right? So just go ahead and write down 49 years. From what? The same two starting and end points. Same starting point. The command or word or permission or paperwork or something to restore and build Jerusalem. Where are we now? Let's see, 49 years. 49 years from that command in Israel, in Jerusalem, thy people, the people of Israel, thy holy city, are together again, just like they were in the days of Nehemiah when they built their temple. And they got that word of permission by Artaxerxes I to start building. We are in this time now, so they're together. All we're waiting for now is that command or word of permission. There's problems in Israel. Jordan doesn't want them to do any work in the old section of Jerusalem. They want to preserve that. They keep petitioning the UN and to keep the place holy, keep it separate, keep it preserved. They don't want any building there. So there's been some problems, but we are within this time now. When the 49 years is up, what's going to happen? Well, the prince that shall come will happen. It's not going to be Jesus. It's going to be the Antichrist, okay? And 49 years is up. Maybe he'll be born then. I don't know. Jesus was born at the end of the 62, the 434 years. This guy may be born at the end of the 49 years. So if he was already born, say like in 2016, because Israel and Jerusalem were together in 1967, 49 years is 2016. If he was born in 2016, if they started doing any building on Jerusalem at that time, it's possible that the guy could be alive today and he might start reigning within 20, 30 years or so. So this is when we are, just letting you know, 70 weeks. I've got charts, I've got more information. It's a heck of a lot better to read it than to sit there and listen to me. I'm not very good at this. Get this book. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. It talks about the four beasts. It talks about Nebuchadnezzar's image. It talks about what I've just talked about, but better than I just did. It's going to move forward into the New Testament. It's going to talk about Jesus in the Olivet Discourse. It's going to explain that in a way that you probably never heard before. I'll give you a clue. When Jesus came, he preached the gospel of the kingdom. He told his people, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is right here. It's at hand. What did the people do? Did they repent? Well, some of them started following him. Some of them, they didn't have any idea what he was going to do. They expected he was going to be a military leader or something to that effect, but that's not what happened. He was rejected. He was put up on that cross and he died. There goes the king of that kingdom. The kingdom didn't come. So when you hear things like Jesus saying, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, there's going to be earthquakes and famines and pestilences, it's not that he's standing there talking to you prophetically, although he is. What he's basically saying is this: had I been accepted, we'd be beating our swords into plowshares. Lions would be laying down with lambs, right? It would be peace on earth. If you died at 100 years, it would be a strange thing. But guess what? You're going to put me on that cross, so it's going to be more of the same. In fact, when he asked his disciples, he said, when I sent you out 2 by 2, did I tell you to take anything with you? And they said, no. He said, okay, well, I'm about to go to the cross. I'm going to tell you right now, go ahead and sell your garment and pick up a sword, because it's not going to get any better. You're going to get more of the same. And that's what we've gotten, more of the same for the last 2,000 years. But he's coming, and here we are today. You'll learn more about Matthew 24. I talk about the apostasy. I talk about the man of sin, the Antichrist. I talk about, this stuff's in 2 Thessalonians. I talked about 1 Thessalonians, the rapture of the church. The 7 churches of Revelation, right? So much more, so much more. When we are a logical assessment of Bible prophecy, the end times, and the second coming of Christ, you're not going to find anything else like it. Get on Amazon, order the book. I don't have it on Kindle. That's for a reason. I'm starting to move away from the internet and those kinds of things. But while we're still living somewhat safely, I can make this video and you can watch it and maybe learn something. So until next time, adios.